Hello again! So, my recent video about the 12-tone system has gotten some attention, which I'm very happy about, and I received a lot of really nice feedback. Thank you very much. There were also a few comments I did not fully understand, something about Nazi plots and that I should stay out of all church buildings. Anyway, some of you had additional questions that were not answered in my video, and those are pretty good questions. So once again, let's go on a journey through the world of musical scales and the theory behind them. When I play a scale on my piano, using every single black and white key, I'm playing a chromatic scale. That's a scale containing all 12 notes of our 12-tone system, so between two consecutive notes, we always have the same interval, a semitone. Now you might ask, since our scale consists of identical intervals, why don't they look the same on the piano? Why are there no black keys between E and F and B and C? And why are there 7 white but only 5 black keys in each octave? Obviously, the fact that we settled on a 12-tone system does not explain the layout of the piano keyboard. First, there's a practical answer. A piano without any black keys, or with black keys between all of the white keys, would be pretty hard to play, because without any recognizable structure, there's no orientation, and the only way to find a specific key would be to count up from the bottom. In the layout we have, it's very easy to identify a C, because it's on the left side of the 2 black keys. So that's definitely an advantage. But of course, there's a better explanation than that, and it has to do with musical scales. As I explained in the previous video, one of the most fundamental ways to construct a musical scale is a chain of fifths. The perfect fifth is the second interval we find in the overtone series, and the most consonant interval after the octave. This eventually led us to the full circle of fifths with all 12 tones of our harmonic system, which we can use to play a chromatic scale. However, this scale is not particularly useful for most musical purposes, because it doesn't have any harmonic structure. Since all notes of the chromatic scale are a semitone apart, there's no hierarchy between them, and it's impossible to define a tonal center. Any point to begin or end a chromatic scale is completely random. So, in order to create a useful musical scale, we must actually use less than 12 notes. Enter the pentatonic scale. The pentatonic scale, which consists of only 5 different notes, is one of the oldest and most influential scales used by humans, and we find versions of it in pretty much every traditional harmonic system around the world. Once again, we can easily create a pentatonic scale by using a chain of fifths. If we begin on C, that leads us to G, D, A, and E. We put these notes into the same octave, and voila, a complete pentatonic scale. Interestingly, if we use the same method with an F sharp as our starting point, we'll arrive at a pentatonic scale which consists of the 5 black keys on our piano. So, if you only play the black keys, you are using a pentatonic scale, and occasionally, composers have made use of this, such as Chopin in his so-called Black Key Etude. Let's go back to our white key pentatonic scale. If we jump another fifth in both directions, we create a heptatonic scale, which consists of 7 notes. Interestingly, these 7 notes happen to be the 7 white keys on the piano. Just as a side note, there are other ways to arrive at the scale. For example, by using the major triad that we find in our overtone series. If we put 3 of these in a row, each new triad beginning on the upper note of the previous one, that also leads us to the same 7 notes. Now, the scale we found here isn't just any heptatonic scale. It's a very specific kind, a diatonic scale. A diatonic scale is a 7-note scale with a particular structure. Unlike the chromatic scale, it doesn't consist of identical intervals. Instead, it's built out of 5 whole tones and 2 semitones in a specific pattern. Basically, it's constructed in such a way that the 2 semitones are as far away from each other as possible. The most common example of this is the C major scale, where the 2 semitones are between E and F and B and C. But of course, that's not the only diatonic scale. Since we can begin the scale on each of our 7 notes, there are actually 7 different diatonic scales, so-called diatonic modes. Because all of them use the same 7 notes, just from different starting points, the only difference between them is the position of the 2 semitones in the scale. These diatonic scales played a huge role in the development of Western music, especially during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Gregorian chants being one prominent example. Over time, 2 of those scales emerged under new names as the harmonic foundation of most of the music we listen to today, the major and minor scale. Now, obviously, we're looking at this from today's perspective, where the names of the notes and the harmonic system have long been established. But of course, it happened the other way around. Because the diatonic scale, with its specific relationships between frequencies, turned out to be so useful, these 7 notes were named with the first 7 letters of the alphabet. So, as you might have guessed by now, the layout of the keys on the piano corresponds to the structure of the diatonic scale. Using only the white keys, we can play all 7 diatonic scales, including the major and minor scale. And it's very well possible to write beautiful music with just these 7 notes. Of course, we want an instrument that allows us to play all 12 notes of our 12-tone system. So we'll need to add 5 black keys to the 7 keys we already have. And here we've reached the core of our answer. Even though the white keys are identical in size, the intervals between them are not the same, because the diatonic scale is built out of 2 different intervals. Since the diatonic scale already contains 2 semitones, we don't need to add black keys between those 2 intervals. In order to create a full chromatic scale of 12 notes, we only need to put black keys between the whole notes of our scale. Now, we can also make sense of this by looking at the relationship between the frequencies of our diatonic scale. As we can see, the 2 semitones are much closer together than the other notes of the scale. By adding 5 tones, or black keys, in the larger gaps, we create an evenly spaced harmonic system of 12 notes. We can find one last way to look at this in our circle of fifths. We used a chain of fifths to create a diatonic scale, which corresponds to the white keys on the piano. The notes we left out are the 5 black keys, which build a perfect pentatonic scale. So, a pentatonic scale of black keys happens to perfectly fit in the gaps of our diatonic white key scale, creating a perfect 12-tone harmonic system. Isn't that kind of magical? Just to complete the picture, music notation follows the same logic. Without accidentals, the written notes correspond to the white keys on the piano, and we need sharps and flats if we want to use any black keys. So, if I write down a C major scale, you can't see that it features 2 different intervals. You have to know that E and F are just a semitone apart, and for that reason, while an F sharp is a black key, an E sharp is not. So, these particularities of our system of music notation, as well as the layout of keys on the piano, can be explained by the significance of the diatonic scale, which in turn is an expression of the very human desire to create harmonic systems that provide a tonal center, useful relationships between notes, and which enable us to tell a story with music.